Now, this sobering report with ISIS reportedly expanding its arsenal to include chemical weapons. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, telling a Senate committee this week the terror group has industrial chemicals like mustard gas in its possession. And he believes ISIS wants to use those chemicals to attack the U.S. CIA Director John Brennan telling 60 Minutes this weekend there is evidence that ISIS is already testing it.
We have a number of instances where ISIL has used chemical munitions on the battlefield.
Artillery shells?
Sure. No.
ISIS has access to chemical artillery shells?
There are reports that ISIS has access to chemical precursors and munitions that they can use.
Are there American assets on the ground right now hunting this down?
The U.S. intelligence is actively involved in being a part of the effort to destroy ISIL and to get as much insight into what they have on the ground inside of Syria and Iraq.
Unbelievable. Well, joining us now, Ambassador James Woolsey, the former director of the CIA and now the chairman of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and chancellor of the Institute of World Politics. Welcome, sir. It's really great to have you on the show today, particularly at a time when this report should really raise alarm bells, not only here in the U.S., but across the globe, that ISIS has its hands on chemical weapons and that there are further reports that it has set its sights to having attacks here in the U.S. and has infiltrated all of these refugee camps with their own operatives, ready to do damage in these countries in a very big way. Your reaction?
Well, this went off the tracks, Uma, 4 or 5 years ago or so when President Obama drew his red line in the dirt and said to Assad in Syria, don't cross that, do not use chemical weapons against your population. Assad did, and we shrugged and turned the problem over to the Russians. And now the Russians are throwing their weight around in the Middle East as well as against Ukraine. ISIS has grown up in order to fill up the gap that was created by our twiddling our thumbs. And pretty much everybody is acquiring some type of access, near term or longer term, to relatively simple weapons of mass destruction, such as chemical weapons. We had best do something to ensure that Iran doesn't end up with a nuclear weapon, either from its friends in North Korea or otherwise, and move into that phase of weapons of mass destruction, because they could knock out our electric grid with an electromagnetic pulse burst.
You know what I found really sobering this week was that we had the National Intelligence Director, James Clapper, telling members of Congress that they actually expect ISIS to hit us here in the U.S. It's basically an attitude like, well, we expect this to happen. It's probably going to happen this year. And that we do know that they are having machines that are capable of making false passports, so that they're giving these passports to their operatives to infiltrate these refugee camps so that they can come over here to the United States and other countries in Europe to wage their campaigns of terror. Did this surprise you?
No, not really at all. I wish it had surprised me, but I think the problem is just getting worse all the time. By the combination of the refugee flow and the openness of our borders, things like the bad guys being able to manufacture their own passports. We have left a vacuum in the Middle East, and it's being filled in terrible, terrible ways.
But the fact that our top intelligence officials are now going public and saying, we do expect there to be an incident in the United States, probably this year. Does that suggest to you that there's a resignation about this, or that our officials really hope to get a handle or get in front of this before this kind of tragedy happens here in the United States?
I think most of them are trying to maybe give some oomph to the notion of, if you see something, say something. They're trying to tell the American population that we really do have a danger here, a serious one, a 9/11 type danger, manifested probably in some other way than an aircraft hijacking, but nonetheless extremely serious. And they're trying to get people to pay attention to it and not try to just wish it away. So I think we're a little slow in getting these types of news from the intelligence community, but better late than never.
When you take a look at what's happening right now, though, do you feel like world leaders are still dragging their heels, dealing with this huge challenge of confronting this terror network? Because it doesn't seem as though there is a sense of urgency at this point, knowing that we are getting these reports of machines making fake passports, and that these terrorists are infiltrating the refugee camps. I mean, all of this seems to be happening at a very steady rate, and we still seem to be sitting back, without a real clear plan of action at this point.
That seems to me to be the case as well. I think the problem is that those of us who lived through the Cold War, we had 45 years of dealing with the Soviets, and the Soviets were kind of an ideal enemy in a way. They were bureaucratic and kind of slow, and they had a lousy economy, and eventually, basically, we persevered and won. And they weren't fanatics. I negotiated with those guys 4 times over major treaties, and they didn't want to die for the principle of each according to his ability, to each according to his need. They wanted to remodel their dachas outside Moscow. And we got used to that kind of an enemy, and that's not what we have now. In ISIS, we have theocratic, totalitarian, genocidal maniacs. And they're also imperialists on the side. They want to build up their empire, essentially, the caliphate. And we have an enemy that wants to literally crucify us, burn us alive, and anything they do which kills us or endangers the United States and the West, from their point of view, is a religious obligation. And if they do it successfully, they will go to heaven and we will go to hell, and that's what they want. It's a very different kind of situation than we had in what I almost sometimes call the good old Cold War.
Wow. Ambassador James Woolsey, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Emma. Yeah.